In late summer of 2015, the thick, humid air hung low over a small garden in Cavite, Philippines, just a short walk from the bustle of Manila. Local investigator Marcos del Rosario was using a forensic flashlight to poke through decades of compacted soil when its beam suddenly fell on something gleaming. He froze. "Control! I need backup at the Cavite scene," he barked into his radio. "And get forensics down here right away." His voice echoed off the faded concrete walls around the yard. In that instant, a gruesome mystery set in motion 33 years earlier in a quiet town in Oklahoma was about to be answered. The ground had been carefully filled in and long undisturbed, until now. There, among the newly turned earth, lay a skeleton. Bones that should never have been so far from home. And right beside the remains was a metal wristwatch, its back engraved with the words D. Ward, USN Ret, 1981. This was the very retirement watch Daniel Ward had received from the Navy, still inscribed with his name and rank. Before we continue this shocking story, if you appreciate in-depth investigations, please like, comment, and hit that subscribe button for The Criminal Schema. Your support helps bring long-forgotten cases back into the light, and we'll make sure you never miss the next episode in this series. Because the discovery in Cavite wasn't just the end of one man's disappearance. It was the first domino in a chain of events that would expose secrets hidden for decades. The evidence pointed to financial disputes, forged documents, and the truth about a well-respected former Navy officer, quietly carried to his grave by someone he trusted. This is not just a mystery solved. It's proof of the persistence of investigators who refuse to let a file gather dust, and it shows the power of forensic science to give a voice to a victim who'd been silent far too long. It's also the story of a community torn apart when Daniel Ward vanished in 1983. For years, Weatherford, Oklahoma buzzed with rumors. Did he run away? Was he killed for revenge? Or was someone close to him involved? These questions buzzed like wildfire on the dry prairie. Neighbors speculated over dinner table conversations and cracks formed beneath the town's surface. Cracks that would explode when the truth finally came out after 3 decades. What makes this case especially haunting is that the answer was never really that far away. The prime suspect had been questioned back in 1983, but nothing could be proven, at least not until new evidence came to light. For decades, that person sat among friends, went to prayer vigils for Dan, and looked Daniel's family in the eye, all while hiding the biggest secret of their life. Now, buckle up and follow us back to the summer of 1983. We will retrace the trail of a disappearance that was buried for decades and uncover the stunning twist that finally closed one of Oklahoma's oldest cold cases. This is a story of loss, deception, persistence, and justice, delayed but never denied. A quiet Oklahoma summer, 1983. It was early July 1983, and America was enjoying a relatively stable period. In towns like Weatherford, Oklahoma, life was tied to farming, school events, and the small community of Vietnam War veterans who returned to their hometowns. With fewer than 10,000 residents, Weatherford was the kind of place where everybody knew each other by name, and news traveled faster than the morning paper. In this quiet town lived 43-year-old Daniel Ward. Daniel was a retired United States Navy officer, a decorated veteran who had served 20 years at sea before retiring as a lieutenant. He and his wife, Evelyn Marquez, lived in a modest single-story home on the southern edge of town. After leaving the Navy in 1981, Daniel found steady work with a civil engineering contractor, earning good pay and staying in close touch with his old Navy buddies. Neighbors described him as calm, punctual, and a real creature of habit. The kind of man you'd set your clock by. One spring day, Daniel mentioned to a few friends that he needed to travel to the Philippines. He said it was to take care of some personal matters, immigration paperwork, and other lingering service issues, and that he might also look into an adoption. To his Navy peers, it sounded plausible. After all, he'd spent 2 decades abroad and might still have ties in Southeast Asia. The plan was to be gone about 3 weeks. On the evening of July 8, 1983, Daniel packed a suitcase. He told his wife he would get up early and drive himself to Oklahoma City to catch a flight the next morning. But, and this would prove to be the last time anyone ever saw him, no one actually witnessed him leaving the house that night. Neighbors later only said they saw headlights flicker around midnight, but couldn't be sure it was Dan's car. His own silver Ford LTD was missing, and the next morning it was gone without a trace. Daniel himself was gone. For 2 days, the family assumed maybe the worst, that he'd missed a flight or ran into travel trouble, but would eventually get in touch. By the 3rd night, with no word from Daniel, worry settled in. His wife Evelyn called everyone she could think of. She spoke to his boss at the engineering firm. She phoned his old buddies in the Navy. She even tried calling the friends he mentioned in Manila. Nothing came up. No flight confirmations. The house looked undisturbed. Only Daniel's packed bags and missing car suggested he really had intended to travel. But the times were before easy cell phones or online check-ins. No one could verify his story. On the 4th day, with no news at all, the family formally reported Daniel missing to the Weatherford Police Department. It was July 12, 1983. The report was taken by Chief Douglas Flynn himself, a veteran officer known for handling civil cases. Flynn interviewed Evelyn and the family. They gave him the basic outline. Daniel, 43, a white male and retired Navy officer, lived in southern Weatherford and was last seen in the house on July 8th. According to his wife's statement, he packed a bag and said he was leaving for the airport to fly to Manila for some military paperwork and adoption business. He said he'd call once he arrived, but Daniel never showed up at the airport. No one saw him drive away. When Chief Flynn asked for proof of the trip, tickets or booking confirmations, Evelyn said Dan had handled those details himself, and she had no records. Flynn immediately put in requests to the airline passenger manifest offices and immigration. They checked the Civil Aeronautics Board records for all flights from Oklahoma City to the Philippines between July 7th and July 12th, and found no one named Daniel Ward or anything close on any passenger list. They checked customs and immigration exit records and found no match for Daniel or his passport number. By July 14th, Flynn jotted in his notes, "No evidence the subject left U.S. territory." Next, Flynn began to pin down exactly when, if at all, Daniel had last been seen. Evelyn claimed he left late on July 8th, but no one could give a precise time. Neighbors Mr. and Mrs. Perry next door remembered seeing car headlights flash by the Ward house around midnight, but they weren't sure whose car it was. Another neighbor further down the block said he thought he heard an engine start at about the same time, but saw nothing. These accounts were inconsistent, giving Flynn only a 3-hour window, roughly 10 p.m. to 1 a.m., for that night's events. Meanwhile, investigations at Daniel's workplace revealed more oddities. His co-workers said Daniel never mentioned any overseas trip before July. In fact, the engineering firm had no record of any approved leave for him. One colleague remembered Daniel asking about short-term leave, but never submitting paperwork. Another person from his office quietly noted to Flynn that a few weeks prior, Daniel seemed tense at home and mentioned wanting a change of scenery, contradictory to Evelyn's claim that everything was normal in their marriage. Flynn added a note to his report. couple's relationship status requires further verification. He even called one of Daniel's closest Navy friends. This friend had spoken to Daniel by phone about a week before the disappearance. Again, no mention of the Philippines, just the same vague talk of personal business. The Navy buddy was sure Daniel said nothing of an international trip. Flynn requested the Ward family's phone and mailing records for that period. There were no overseas calls logged, nothing out of the ordinary. Bank statements revealed no flights or credit card charges for travel or planes. It was as if Daniel simply vanished without buying a ticket or leaving the state. After 2 days of compiling these initial facts, Chief Flynn put together an 8-page preliminary report. He listed 3 key issues. 1. There was no evidence Daniel traveled abroad. 2. There was no clear timeline of when he left his home. And 3. Conflicting accounts about how he and Evelyn were getting along. He noted, current data strongly suggests the subject has not left the state of Oklahoma. Domestic scenarios that could lead to prolonged loss of contact must be considered. The report was forwarded to the State Missing Persons Coordinator with a recommendation to keep the case open for 30 days while they waited to hear back from airlines and federal agencies. But for now, on paper, Weatherford police treated it as a routine missing person case, not knowing how deep the mystery would become. The home search. Once Flynn was convinced Daniel had likely not flown to Manila, he turned the focus back home. On July 16, 1983, with a search warrant in hand, Weatherford officers went through the Ward house room by room. They wanted documents, clues, anything that could explain Daniel's plans. The home was a small single-story with an attached garage. According to the search log, everything was normally locked and undisturbed. There were no signs of forced entry, no overturned furniture, no broken items. Nothing screamed struggle. Police started in Daniel's home office, his personal workspace. They carefully cataloged everything. They took retirement papers, Navy Department correspondence, bank statements, utility bills, basically anything on that desk. On the desk was a typewriter, an Olympia, with fresh ink in its ribbon. They even sealed the paper and ink as evidence. In a drawer they found Daniel's U.S. passport, still valid, but with no recent stamps or evidence of travel. Chief Flynn noted in his search report that the passport remaining at home reduces the likelihood the victim left the country legally. They found an empty mail slot on the desk and seized a small notebook with some handwritten notes. But none of these had any reference to a trip. There were also envelopes, old telegrams, unrelated, and a typewritten resignation or retirement letter that Daniel had presumably prepared. Nothing in any of these said anything about an upcoming flight or travel itinerary. Next, they checked the bedroom the couple shared. It, too, was orderly. Clothes neatly hung, suitcases stacked in the closet. Interestingly, some of Daniel's usual business travel shirts were missing from the closet. Just a handful of casual outfit pieces left. But the suitcases themselves were empty, as if they might have been used. If Daniel had packed, there was nothing in the luggage to indicate what he might have taken, but no dirty laundry or anything left behind either. The house was surprisingly tidy, not the scene of chaos you might expect if something terrible had happened in there. Outside, officers examined the yard and garage. Daniel's silver Ford was gone, as the family had already reported. The garage door was fully closed when they arrived, with the latch untouched. The concrete floor of the driveway and garage had a few fresh scratches around the handle, but nothing obvious. Weather being dry and sandy, there were no clear tire marks or footprints to follow. They knocked on neighboring doors to ask if anyone saw something, but nothing concrete emerged. Around the backyard, they found a small storage shed. Inside were a few empty cardboard boxes and packing supplies, suggesting the family might have been preparing to move or pack something. A curious find given the supposed trip to Manila. There were also some freshly disturbed dirt patches in the garden beds, but nothing so fresh that it could be clearly an unmarked grave or anything dramatic. It might have been the couple planting something, or just normal yard work. Nothing illegal stood out. After 3 hours, the search team had compiled 27 pieces of evidence: Daniel's passport, financial records, correspondence, personal notes, a photograph of the couple, the typewriter and ribbon, and some stationery. All of it was tagged and bagged. The overall conclusion: no traces of violence or unauthorized entry found. Living environment maintained normally. Some personal items missing. Possibly taken on trip or removed. In other words, the house looked like someone planned a trip, but there was no smoking gun. Chief Flynn wrote that he was left with more questions than answers, especially about whether the trip was ever real at all. Flynn ordered everything sealed and sent to the technical division. He wanted handwriting analysis on the notes, ink analysis on the typewritten materials, and a thorough checking of the suspect items. Meanwhile, the house was essentially put under seal, a silent guard waiting for the next clue. Sweeping the roads. With no clear evidence from the home, Flynn expanded the search outside the city. He reasoned Daniel would have taken the main highway east to Oklahoma City if he really was headed for Will Rogers Airport. On July 18, 1983, the Weatherford police teamed up with the Oklahoma Highway Patrol for a 20-mile sweep along Highway 54 and connecting roads. They marked out all potential stopping points: gas stations, diners, roadside parks. Officers drove each stretch at night, looking for sign of Daniel or his car. They also stopped at truck stops and asked the night shift attendants if they had seen anyone matching Daniel's description. The only lead was a vague tip from a waitress at a small diner near the Highway 97 exit. She thought she might have seen a tall man in uniform eating alone around midnight on July 8th. But she wasn't certain it was Daniel, and she remembered no name or license plate. It was as good as nothing. They also checked traffic reports for that night. The Oklahoma Department of Transportation had no record of any accidents, collisions, or abandoned vehicles on that highway from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. No tow trucks logged a call for a Ford Ltd. either. Impound lots in all 3 surrounding counties were called. No matching car turned up. Next, they thought perhaps he could have driven some shortcut. The Washita River runs southwest of Weatherford, and local lore said farmers sometimes took unpaved roads through the river crossings at night. So police crews walked those paths and flew a helicopter over the remote fields and woods. They combed farmland and rest stops, but turned up nothing related to Daniel or the Ford Ltd. In total, the search covered about 50 miles around Weatherford. Every likely spot was marked on a map and ruled out. The summary read, "No objects, witnesses, or mechanical evidence related to Daniel Ward were found." By July 21st, after 3 days, the physical search was suspended for lack of new data. The case file was set to administrative monitoring, essentially on hold, while officers waited for tips or federal results. By this point, all the initial avenues seemed empty. Daniel's car was nowhere to be found, and the man himself had disappeared without a trace. The only explanation, if any, was that he didn't actually leave town. But where was he then? The mysterious telegram. 3 days later, on the afternoon of July 24, 1983, Chief Flynn's phone rang with new information from Evelyn. She had received a telegram, supposedly from her husband in the Philippines, confirming he arrived safely. "He will call soon," the note read, signed simply D. Evelyn handed the yellow Western Union telegram form to the chief at Weatherford Police Headquarters. But Flynn's experience kicked in immediately. The telegram was off. There were no standard telegraph codes or transaction numbers on it. The ink color was wrong. The line spacing was sloppy. Most strikingly, the thick yellow paper had no official Western Union watermark or embossing. Someone had clearly typed or printed it by hand and dropped it in Evelyn's mailbox with no envelope or postmark. It was so amateur that Flynn suspected it might be a photocopy of a handwritten note. He marked it for forensic analysis. The flicker of doubt in his mind grew. If Daniel had indeed gone to Manila, why had he seemingly forgotten to report it properly for 2 weeks, only to send a crudely forged note? Had the family planned to forge the telegram? Who typed it up? Flynn did his own preliminary handwriting comparison. The signature on the telegram was hastily scrawled D. Even without lab tools, he could see it didn't match Daniel's signature style in the retirement papers. This was a clear warning sign. Possible forgery. He logged it and locked the document in evidence. Days later, the forensic report returned. This telegram was fake. The handwriting was traced to a mechanical typewriter, not to a Western Union teletype. The ink didn't match any telegraph machines. The paper was plain office stock cut to size. In short, it was a clever hoax. Document manually fabricated, showing signs of copying and forgery, concluded the lab report. Flynn updated the case file at once. What had looked like hope, news from abroad, was now almost certainly a lie. The timeline shifted again. It was more likely than ever that Daniel had never left the U.S. The telegram became evidence, the 28, sealed in the police vault. A note in the report read, "Document does not meet technical standards for a legitimate telegram and is highly likely created to support the narrative of travel abroad." With this, the theory of Daniel's voluntary trip collapsed. The possibility of foul play was now very much in play. Confirming the lies. At this stage, Chief Flynn knew the case required federal help. Daniel Ward had been a Navy man. The Navy Department might have records. So on August 1, 1983, Flynn sent a formal request to the U.S. Navy Records Center. He asked if there had been any orders or travel authorizations for Daniel Ward in 1983. 10 working days later, the Navy replied, "No." The file showed Dan retired in 1981 and never had any temporary duty or assignments overseas. No travel funding. No duty roster. Nothing. The Navy's conclusion was blunt. Daniel Ward had no official military reason to be in the Philippines in 1983. Meanwhile, Flynn dispatched another request via official State Department channels. Could the U.S. consulate in Manila check if any American citizen named Daniel Ward had entered the Philippines in that time? They even gave the consul Dan's passport number. After a few weeks, the U.S. Embassy in Manila responded, "No citizen by that name, no passport records, no consular requests, no hospital or incident reports involving him." The Philippines immigration said there was no entry or exit matching his identity. Even the Subic Bay Naval Base Police had no reports of any U.S. casualties or visitors named Ward. These confirmations all piled up. It was virtually impossible that Daniel had gone to Manila at all. Flynn summarized their status in a 12-page report. He concluded 3 points. 1. Daniel Ward's disappearance was not due to any lawful international travel. 2. No evidence of his presence in the Philippines was found. 3. The alleged telegram was forged. All these pointed to one thing. Someone in the U.S. had likely concocted a story of a trip abroad. Flynn wrote professionally that the case showed signs of administrative interference intended to create a false impression of the missing person's travel. Because of these findings, Flynn recommended reclassifying the case. What had been a routine missing person file now had every appearance of fraud. It was time to consider the possibility that someone had lied, possibly about Daniel's fate, and maybe even benefited from it. The paperwork was updated, moving the file out of purely civil administration and into potential criminal tracking. But legally, he still had to wait for other agencies. The missing person case couldn't be officially closed or changed without every stone turned. So by late August 1983, Daniel Ward's case was still open, but on a new path, from missing traveler to missing under suspicious circumstances. A Filipino private eye. The Ward family, still desperate for answers, didn't wait idly. In late August 1983, acting on Sheriff Flynn's suggestion, they hired a private investigator in the Philippines. The agency was run by Carlos Vega, a former local police officer experienced in American cases. Vega's job was simple, but difficult. Find proof that Daniel Ward ever reached the Philippines. Vega arrived in Manila and started with airport records. He pored over passenger manifests at Ninoy Aquino Airport, the main international airport, for arrivals between July 9th and July 15th of 1983. Name by name, he searched for Daniel Ward, or anything similar. Nothing. Not even a partial match. He also canvassed hotels in Manila and towns near Subic Bay. Looking at guest ledgers, many hotels back then still used handwritten logs. No American guests matched. He interviewed hotel clerks and front desk managers, but none recalled any tall, blond, soldier-like man staying at their place. Next, he checked hospitals and clinics near Subic. Maybe Dan had gone to a doctor or something. Again, no records of any U.S. citizen under that name. He even visited the offices of the U.S. military bases around Manila to see if any visitor logs or emergency calls fit that week. 0 results. By mid-September, Vega was in Cavite City, a coastal community about 20 miles from Manila. It was near Subic Bay, and more importantly, it was Evelyn's old hometown. Some locals told him they remembered a tall white man speaking English in the neighborhood for a few days in early July. He was seen with a small group of locals walking around a house near the Central Market. But no one knew his name. This kind of vague tip was frustrating, but it was something. Vega traced the house. It belonged to a distant relative of Evelyn Marquez. But when Vega knocked, the current occupants said no. They didn't host any American in July 1983. The statements varied depending on who he asked. Unreliable memory, perhaps. He still took photos of the house, 4 angles of the front and sides, and one of the backyard garden area. Interestingly, he noticed the soil in that garden looked recently disturbed, furrowed and loose in some patches. Nothing conclusive, but worth noting. After weeks of digging, literally and figuratively, Vega had a final report for the Ward family. It said, no evidence Daniel Ward entered the Philippines at all. Nothing he found could confirm Daniel's presence or explain his disappearance. The only odd lead was that report of a foreign man near Evelyn's relative's home. Vega speculated that if the man existed, he might have been staying there, but he admitted the evidence was tenuous. The report, about 15 pages long, included Vega's notes, a rough map, and the set of 12 photographs he took around that house. The Ward family handed these to Chief Flynn when they got back home in early October. Sheriff Flynn filed them away under Case MP 83147 for Missing Person, 1983, Case 147. In the summary, he wrote that the Filipino report did not establish the victim's presence in the country, but he ordered the documents and photos to be retained in case future evidence matched. Once again, the Vietnamese lack of evidence had turned up only more questions. By October 1983, the investigation was saturated with proofs of what didn't happen and 0 on what did. the insurance claim, and a forged death certificate. Just as everything seemed stalled, another development flipped the case on its head. In late October 1983, 13 months after Daniel disappeared, the Military Insurance Office in Washington, D.C., got a package. It was a death benefits claim for Daniel Ward, and it was put together by his widow, Evelyn. The packet included a death claim form, a notarized copy of a death certificate, purportedly for Daniel, and proof that Evelyn was his lawful widow and beneficiary on the policy. They were all official-looking, but the insurance agency had a sense something was wrong. Before they could pay out the benefits, which for a veteran with 20-plus years could be around $243,000, they decided to check the paperwork. Right away, the forms didn't add up. The death claim form had a format that didn't match any Oklahoma template. The state seal was missing or wrong. The cause of death section was filled in by hand, with an ink color different from the rest of the form. Most alarming, the death certificate listed the certifying official as Douglas Flynn, Sheriff, Weatherford, PD. It even had an embossed seal. But the signature was poorly matched to Chief Flynn's known signature samples. The position of the seal on the paper was slightly off, and the printing style was all wrong for an official state document. The insurance agency called Weatherford PD and asked Flynn if he remembered this certificate. Flynn was stunned. He had never certified any death certificate for Daniel. No one had contacted him to do so. But recognizing how official it looked, he told the insurer to send him the original so he could have it examined. When the set arrived back in Oklahoma, forensic experts took them apart. The death certificate turned out to be a convincing forgery. It was printed on ordinary paper with no embedded security features. The letters were from a typewriter, not a professional press, and the notary seal was simply stamped on by hand. Even Flynn's signature had been scanned, enlarged, and mechanically reproduced on the form. Likewise, the claim form itself was riddled with inconsistencies, and unlike any genuine state form. The lab report on these documents was decisive. Everything in that insurance packet had been fabricated. Nothing was genuine. The conclusion: Evelyn Marquez had submitted forged documents to the Military Insurance Office. The whole package was a fraud. This was huge. Here was direct evidence of criminal activity, forgery of government documents, and fraud. It also provided a motive. Someone tried to make it look like Daniel was dead in order to collect insurance money. The amount was large, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and if paid out, it would go straight to the beneficiary, Evelyn. Chief Flynn documented this in his report on October 22, 1983. He wrote clearly that the death records were forged, and thus the person who submitted them had a financial motive to benefit. He ordered all related evidence seized and noted it under a new classification in the case file: forged documents related to survivor benefits insurance. He also told the Department of Defense to freeze any payouts on Ward's policy until the investigation resolved the forgery. This was no longer a simple missing person case. It was a crime scene on paper. Yet even with this breakthrough, Daniel's body had never been found, and no one had actually seen him die. Under Oklahoma law, after a year with no sign of a person, he could be declared presumed dead for legal purposes. By December 1984, after 16 months of fruitless searching, an internal meeting was held with the district attorney's office and the insurance company. They decided to suspend active investigation. There was simply no physical evidence of murder, and no body. They had proven fraud, but not murder. Legally, the case was put on ice, and Daniel Ward was administratively declared missing, presumed dead. In February 1985, the insurance money was finally released, Evelyn Marquez received $243,000 as widow's benefits. Weatherford PD's records were updated to mark the case closed with death presumed. Daniel Ward was, on paper, gone and presumed dead, and the community's questions were left unanswered. Cold storage, 1986-2014. Once a case was closed, Oklahoma procedure was clear. The files and evidence went into storage. In 1986, as part of a government reorganization, all files involving veterans were moved to the Joint Department of Defense and State Law Enforcement Data Storage Center at Tinker Air Force Base. Daniel Ward's case file, MP83147, became one of thousands of closed cases there. For years, it gathered dust. In the late 1980s and 1990s, every 12 months the evidence was inventoried, and officers made sure everything was still sealed and intact. The metal items, like the watch, the typewriter, were locked in the evidence vault. The box that contained all the documents, police reports, search logs, correspondence, sat on shelves. No law enforcement agency requested it. By the 2000s, federal agencies began digitizing records. In 2006, Daniel's case file was scanned into a PDF, more than 400 pages. Still, there was no change in the case status. Between 2006 and 2014, the digital system showed only routine checks. Twice an inventory clerk at Tinker tapped into the file to verify nothing was missing. No clues, no witness tips, no new leads. FBI and federal DNA databases were still in infancy. No cross-check was possible back then. Evelyn and her relatives didn't come under scrutiny again at the time. The Oklahoma Records Office listed MP83147 as an inactive cold file, retained for reference only. It quietly sat on Shelf Row 4, Evidence Warehouse 2, at Tinker AFB, unchanged for more than 30 years. The conclusion was simple: no new activity, no leads, not under investigation. Cold case reassessment, 2015. Fast forward to 2015. The FBI had launched a new initiative to comb through unresolved missing person cases from before 1990. They prioritized cases involving forgery or federal funds, exactly like MP83147, which now had forged telegrams, forged certificates, and military insurance. A team at the FBI's Oklahoma City field office flagged Daniel Ward's old file. Special Agent Rachel Doyle, an experienced investigator in financial and document fraud, was assigned to reevaluate it in March 2015. Her mission: review every scrap of evidence in the digitized archive and decide if federal statutes might apply. Over the next 3 weeks, Doyle pored over the scanned documents. She paid special attention to the 2 forged items we know of: the telegram and the insurance death package. Both had been prepared by Evelyn Marquez. Doyle noticed something crucial. The telegram and the death certificate looked like they might have come from the same typewriter. And that typewriter was the one seized from the Ward home all those years ago. The old reports hinted at this, but never tested it. Doyle realized that modern forensic methods could confirm if Daniel's own Olympia typewriter had produced both documents. If so, that put the crime scene right in the Ward's house. She wrote an internal memo recommending the original documents be examined with today's technology: ink dating, imaging analysis, spectral analysis. And they should do it on the actual originals, not just scans, to preserve the chain of custody. The FBI quickly approved retrieving the evidence from storage. On April 6, 2015, Doyle and agents went to Tinker AFB. They unsealed the evidence boxes and checked everything. All the old items, the forged telegram, the forged death certificate, the typewriter, the original photograph prints of the backyard, even the burial site photos, were in perfect condition. They logged every item and took new high-resolution photographs. Then they shipped the telegram, insurance papers, and typewriter to the FBI laboratory's Document Examination Unit. The lab's report was eye-opening. Using spectral analysis on the typewriter ribbon, they found an ink composition match between the telegram and the expired ribbon from the Olympia typewriter that had been in the house. In other words, the same machine that Daniel owned typed that fake telegram. The paper fibers and ink age also matched. It was indeed made in 1983. The death certificate and claim form were similarly examined. The forensic team discovered that 3 different ink formulations were used on the forms, indicating they were filled out in at least 3 separate sessions, not in one go as an official document would be. The official signature of Chief Flynn on the death certificate was proven to be mechanically lifted and reprinted, exactly as suspected. Both the telegram and certificate showed identical microabrasion patterns from that Olympia typewriter. All of this confirmed something Doyle suspected. Both key forged documents were produced on Daniel Ward's own typewriter, right in his house. There was no doubt now that whoever typed them had access to the house and, likely, the typewriter ribbon after Daniel disappeared. The forensic link was undeniable. It placed Evelyn or an accomplice inside the Ward household when creating these lies. Beyond documents, Doyle re-examined old photographs from July 1983. One backyard photo from the original police search, labeled Photo 12C, had been considered boring at the time. But with modern image enhancement, Doyle noticed a small, shiny object near the corner of the eastern fence. When zoomed and adjusted, it looked like the face of a metal wristwatch. It was near where potted plants used to be. Daniel was a Navy man who got an engraved watch at retirement. Could this be it? She recalled something else, the Filipino investigator's pictures. Vega's photo of the backyard at Evelyn's relative's house in Cavite showed a pile of disturbed earth in the same southeast corner of the lot. The front yard and backyard soil at that property didn't look the same as when Daniel disappeared, according to Vega's old photo. Putting 2 and 2 together, Doyle thought, what if Daniel's body was buried there? In a June 2, 2015 memo to her superiors, she recommended a new step: send a team to the Philippines to check the property in Cavite, where Vega had seen those soil marks. With permission from the U.S. Attorney General, the FBI's International Operations Division opened a channel with the Philippines National Bureau of Investigation, NBI. The Cavite investigation, August 2015, the NBI agreed to cooperate. In early August 2015, a joint FBI-NBI team flew to the Philippines. They worked under a mutual legal assistance treaty, with local warrants and supervision by Philippine officials. On August 14th, they stood in the very backyard of that Cavite city lot. The ground was flat now, but investigators noticed a slight irregularity in the grass, that corner where Vega's photo had shown fresh soil. Armed with shovels and trowels, they carefully began to dig. The goal was to search for any disturbed layers of earth. Layer by layer, they peeled back the soil. After about 3 days of meticulous digging, at roughly 1.5 meters deep, the team found the first bone fragments. These were old bones, long, brittle, and arranged in the shape of a human skeleton. The rest of the skeleton lay just nearby, as the dig continued around it. They had found a whole body, not in a coffin or any normal gravesite, just lying there, partially covered in earth. Next to the skeleton, on the ground, were personal effects. First, a rusted wristwatch. Corroded, but the face was intact enough to read. It had engraved initials, although time had worn them nearly illegible. Investigators cleaned it gently, and under magnification could make out D. Ward, USN Ret, 1981, exactly matching Daniel's retirement watch engraving. Beside the watch lay a tarnished silver ring. Etched on it were the letters USN. Nearby, they found two metal fragments, small pieces of a Navy insignia pin that Daniel had once worn on his uniform. There was also a belt buckle from a military uniform. In the rib area of the skeleton, soil yielded three small metal projectiles, bullet fragments roughly 9 millimeters in size. These appeared to be bullets that might have been in the body or around it when buried. Everything was photographed and logged with GPS coordinates. The joint team followed strict protocols. The scene was described, the sketches made, and each item assigned a code, CA Cavite 2015 001 02, etc. The local government officials watched to ensure procedures were proper, and the U.S. Embassy's legal attaché observed to guarantee American evidence chain integrity. With tears in some of their eyes, perhaps, the investigators quietly removed the remains and evidence. None of them mentioned it, but they probably all knew what this meant. These remains, with the Navy items, almost certainly belonged to Daniel Ward. It explained why the burial site had soil that didn't match any garden bloom. Daniel's body had been placed there intentionally. A clandestine burial. By August 18th, everything, bones, bullet fragments, and personal artifacts, was secured and sent to the FBI laboratory back in the U.S. with the proper diplomatic handoff paperwork. They noted in the report, remains consistent with an adult male. Personal effects include retirement watch engraved D. Ward USN, ring with USN letters, belt buckle, and two Navy insignia pins. 3 small-caliber bullets recovered. Preliminary observation was that this was an adult male, roughly 5'10", and middle-aged. But the final word had to come from forensic labs. Identifying Daniel Ward, back in the States, the remains arrived at the FBI's Forensic Science Laboratory in Quantico on August 28, 2015. They were processed under case number CVIT 2051. Forensic anthropologists went to work. DNA samples were taken from a femur and a molar tooth. They ran tests to estimate age at death, sex, height, ancestry, and any unique features. Dental records would also be key. Meanwhile, they needed a reference DNA sample. The lab contacted the Navy's records to find Daniel's closest relative. They discovered Daniel had no children, but he had a sister, whose child, a nephew, lived in Oklahoma City. With the Ward family's permission, the nephew provided a cheek swab. After about 2 weeks of analysis, on September 15, 2015, the final report arrived, a 99.99% genetic match. The remains were identified as Daniel Ward beyond any doubt. Dental X-rays from Navy service, in particular, a distinctive silver filling in an upper molar, matched exactly the teeth they had. The skeletal measurements matched Daniel's reported height and build. The calcified scar on a wrist bone, from an old hand injury in 1979, matched his medical file. Most importantly, the DNA confirmed it. They also determined cause of death. Forensic pathologists examined the skull and ribs. The skull had a small, rounded fracture on the right side, a bullet entry wound. Another bullet hole had passed through the sternum, breastbone, at close range. The recovered projectiles were identified as consistent with a 9mm handgun. In other words, Daniel had been shot execution style, likely twice at close range, 1 shot to the head, 1 to the chest. There were no signs of defensive wounds on the bones, suggesting he was taken by surprise or at gunpoint. The report concluded Daniel Ward died from gunshot wounds to the head and chest. The manner is homicide. With this, on September 20, 2015, the FBI formally reclassified case MP83147 as a homicide with concealment and handed it off to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Oklahoma for federal jurisdiction. They gave it a new file number, FBI HC 2015 OKDW for homicide case, 2015, Oklahoma, Daniel Ward. The message was clear. Daniel did not leave on his own. He was murdered and buried overseas. Following the money. Now that Daniel was confirmed dead, investigators refocused on who stood to gain. The very next step was a financial investigation. They retrieved Daniel's military insurance transaction records from 1985. Sure enough, in February 1985, $243,000 had been transferred from the Military Insurance Fund to Evelyn Ward's account at First National Bank of Weatherford. They subpoenaed Evelyn's bank records from that period. What they found told a clear story. Evelyn withdrew the cash in large chunks. Within a week, in March 1985, she made 3 withdrawals over $20,000 each, mostly in cash. The remaining balance was wired into 2 new accounts in late 1984, one in her own name, another in the name of an overseas relative. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Public records showed that in September 1985, just 7 months after the money arrived, Evelyn purchased commercial property in Weatherford for $76,000 in cash. It turned out to be a storefront for a hair salon, which she registered under the business name Evelyn's Studio. This was remarkable. Her income from then on, per tax filings, jumped to about $48,000 per year, roughly 3 times her previous earnings. Even though the salon's returns were not fully consistent with that level of income. The FBI noted that the initial capital for the salon matched nearly exactly the insurance payout, minus the property purchase price. They also checked international transfers. The relative in the Philippines, a cousin of Evelyn's named Marisol Gonzalez, received about $30,000 in March 1986, almost exactly the kind of money Evelyn would have had available from the insurance payout. This looked like money laundering or asset dissipation. Perhaps most damning, when FBI analysts pulled the insurance payment paperwork from the Treasury archives, they saw one detail that had slipped by before. On the authorization forms for the payout, the signature of Sheriff Douglas Flynn appeared, but it was clearly a stamp of the same forged signature. Flynn had never seen or touched these forms, yet there was his name as the authorizing official. The very same forgery from before was used again to release the funds. By October 3, 2015, the Financial Crimes Unit had its report ready. It concluded that Evelyn Marquez intentionally misappropriated federal funds through fraud. The insurance payout was obtained via forged death documents, and the money went into her pocket and business, rather than any legitimate use. The timing, amounts, and signatures all pointed to deliberate crime. Doyle's notes said there was sufficient basis to establish federal jurisdiction over insurance fraud and document forgery. With that, federal criminal charges became obvious. The chain was Daniel disappears, wife forges trip and death to get money. The evidence was now collected: forged telegram and death certificate, witness accounts, coming next, and financial records, linking Evelyn to the fraud. Eyewitnesses step forward. Even with DNA and financial proof, investigators still needed direct evidence about the night of July 8, 1983. Who last saw Daniel? Who saw Evelyn? It turned out someone did, but nobody knew it at first because he left Oklahoma not long after. Records finally uncovered Rafael Jimenez, who had lived with Daniel and Evelyn. Rafael was Evelyn's cousin from the Philippines, only about 17 at the time of the disappearance. He had been sponsored by the Wards when he immigrated in early 1982. But Rafael disappeared from their household in 1984, and no one in Weatherford had maintained contact. Through clues in census and visa records, FBI agent Doyle tracked him to San Diego, California, where he was now a marine mechanic. In November 2015, the FBI flew Raphael to Oklahoma City for an interview. Sitting in a small room at FBI headquarters with an interpreter, just in case, Raphael told his story. "I remember that night clearly," Raphael began in Spanish, which the interpreter relayed. "On the evening of July 8th, he heard Daniel and Evelyn arguing quietly in the living room. Daniel was angry about something. Raphael didn't know what. Suddenly, he heard the garage door open. Curious, Raphael went to the upstairs window that looked down into the driveway. There he saw a strange man, heavy-set and wearing a dark baseball cap, standing beside Daniel's silver Ford. Evelyn was in the doorway. The two of them seemed to be talking. Maybe the man was directing Daniel or helping with luggage. Raphael couldn't tell. But Daniel himself was not at the car. The man was simply standing there. A few minutes later, the engine roared. The Ford pulled out of the garage. Raphael watched from the window as the car left the driveway, turning toward the main road. He recognized that it was Daniel's car because of the bumper sticker. Then it was gone. Daniel never returned. That next morning, Raphael said, Evelyn told him that Daniel had flown to the Philippines and not to mention anything about the man he saw. Raphael went to clean the garage floor as Evelyn had asked. On the concrete were a few dark streaks, like grease or oil, maybe a leak from the car. Evelyn seemed anxious and kept telling him, "Don't tell anyone about the man," with a stern look. Raphael's statement was careful and consistent. He signed and dated his testimony. Doyle checked it against old notes. It matched the neighborhood rumblings that someone saw headlights and hearing an engine that night. Raphael had no apparent reason to lie. He wasn't in town, didn't stand to gain anything, and for 30 years had never said a word. In fact, only now did investigators find out he was even in Weatherford at the time. To double-check, the FBI showed Raphael photographs of the Ward house. Even though he was upstairs in the photo, Raphael quickly pointed to the window and driveway view. He also described the man's clothing in more detail. Dark polo shirt, worn jeans, maybe in his late 30s. In a follow-up, he passed a lie detector with high confidence on his account. Meanwhile, Doyle also re-interviewed the Perry couple from next door. Shown the transcript of Raphael's story, they remembered clearer that night. Yes, they had seen headlights and heard a car, but they never saw a person. Now, Raphael's account made sense. They affirmed it fit what they'd heard. By late December 2015, all this witness evidence was in the file. The reports declared it explicitly. Daniel was taken by someone else that night, and it wasn't voluntary. At least 2 people saw Daniel's house empty of Daniel while his car left. The only man present was a stranger. And Evelyn apparently knew it. Special Agent Doyle's summary stated, "These statements confirm that Daniel Ward did not leave on his own. A third party was at the scene, and the victim's wife immediately covered it up." Building the case. By February 2016, Doyle and the U.S. Attorney's Office had compiled more than 800 pages of evidence. It fell into 4 main categories: positive ID, the DNA and forensics confirming the skeletal remains were Daniel Ward; witness accounts, testimony from Rafael Jimenez and the Perry neighbors about the unknown man and Daniel's last night; fraudulent documents, the forged telegrams and death certificate, proven to have been typed in the Ward home; financial records, the insurance payout trail showing Evelyn's financial gain, and forged signatures. They were ready to prosecute. On March 4, 2016, the U.S. District Court in Oklahoma City issued an arrest warrant for Evelyn Marquez, Ward. She faced 3 federal charges. 1, financial fraud, wire fraud under 18 U.S.C., paragraph 1343, Part 2, forgery of government documents, 18 U.S.C. paragraph 101, and 3, concealment of a U.S. citizen's body abroad, 18 U.S.C. paragraph 1119. The plan was to arrest her quietly. Evelyn was now 51 and still living in Oklahoma, in a two-story house in Cleveland County. She had opened that salon and lived a comfortable life since the 80s. At 6:40 a.m. on March 7, 2016, FBI agents and Oklahoma City police quietly surrounded her house. Evelyn was downstairs, getting ready to open Evelyn's studio for the day. They showed her the warrant. She was calm but perplexed. The agents read her rights and took her into custody without incident. They also had a search warrant for her home. Agents quickly checked the back office of her house, salon. Inside a locked metal box in a desk drawer, they found surprising items: copies of Daniel Ward's life insurance papers, photocopies of that forged death certificate, and, amazingly, 2 yellow Western Union forms exactly like the telegram. They also found what looked like another handwritten draft of a fake message to the Philippines. All these were sealed and inventoried on the spot. It was as if she had been planning for her arrest, or at least keeping the evidence close. Meanwhile, Evelyn was taken to the FBI office for booking. By noon that day, the U.S. attorney was informed the suspect was in custody. Special Agent Doyle wrote a concise report of the arrest. Execution of the arrest warrant was conducted in compliance with federal regulations. The chain of custody and legality were maintained. Evidence was seized per the warrant. Local news went quiet until after the arrest so as not to alert Evelyn. When it became public, she was identified as the widow of Daniel Ward, who had just been taken into custody. All of Weatherford was once again stunned. Questioning the widow 2 days later, on March 7th and 8th, 2016, Evelyn Marquez was formally questioned by FBI agents, always with an attorney present. Special Agent Doyle conducted the interviews. This time the detectives had all their cards on the table. They laid out the forensic evidence of Daniel's death in Cavite, the DNA match, the documents typed on the typewriter. Everything. They told Evelyn about the money trail and the third-party witness. Under pressure, Evelyn admitted to some things, mostly under the weight of evidence. In her recorded statement, she said, "I did lie about Daniel going to the Philippines. I filled out those telegrams myself." She confessed to forging the death certificate and claim forms as well, saying it was to make everything look official so I could get the money. She claimed desperation, that Daniel was gone. She feared he was dead. And she needed money to live. She said she thought no one would ever find out. But when asked directly if she had hurt Daniel, Evelyn clammed up. She insisted Daniel went to the Philippines and died there. When told the labs proved otherwise, she grew silent and asked for a lawyer. She had admitted the fraud, but never said the word murder or kill. The transcripts show she quietly sat, staring at the wall after that. The next day's session focused on the money. The FBI showed her the bank statements, the property deed, the business license, and the transfers. Evelyn acknowledged spending the insurance money on the salon and giving some money to family, but continued to deny any knowledge of Daniel's fate. She cried that she thought he was coming back. In the end, the agents had Evelyn's admissions of forgery on tape, plus the mountain of evidence. They prepared their report for the U.S. attorney. The suspect acknowledges forging documents and collecting insurance benefits. She knew her husband would not be returning. Her lawyers argued that she never admitted to physically harming Daniel and that the claim was simply financial. But the investigators saw the pieces falling into place. Evelyn had lied from the start about his travel. She created a fake death, and she kept his memory even as she was arranging that memory to claim money. The FBI report noted that Evelyn's answer of, "I thought he wasn't coming back," implied she knew something. On March 14, 2016, the U.S. Attorney formally indicted Evelyn Marquez. The charges were the same three: financial fraud, document forgery, and concealment of a body. The indictment alleged a scheme to defraud the U.S. government and to hide the circumstances of Daniel's death. Evelyn pleaded not guilty, but the evidence was stacked high against her. She was ordered held without bail. The trial was set for the following spring in federal court in Oklahoma City. The trial, May 2017. In May 2017, Evelyn Marquez's trial commenced before Judge Harold E. Keeling in the United States District Court for the Western District of Oklahoma. It drew widespread attention. Weatherford residents still remembered the mystery. Newspapers and media called it Oklahoma's coldest cold case. The prosecution painted a clear narrative. Daniel Ward vanished on July 8, 1983. The defendant, Evelyn, quickly spun a tale that he ran off to the Philippines. She forged a telegram and death certificate to support that story. Then she reaped the financial windfall of his death benefit. Meanwhile, she knew Daniel was dead and buried in Cavite. The evidence would show her guilt. They led with the hard facts. First, the FBI forensic specialists testified that the skeleton and personal items found in the Philippines were indeed Daniel Ward's. They showed the photo of the corroded watch engraved with D. Ward USN, now cleaned up but clearly his. They displayed the 2 holes in the sternum and skull on medical illustrations. They even had a 3D model of the Cavite site. Next, forensic document examiners took the stand. They demonstrated how the telegram and death certificate were typed on the Olympia machine seized from the Ward home. They passed around the papers and a sample of ribbon ink. The jury saw the microscopic markings proving these fake documents were made on Evelyn and Daniel's own typewriter. Then came the financials. Agents from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit presented charts of the bank activity, showing the $243,000 deposit and the expenditures. They had copies of the new property deed and the salon license, and they cross-examined Evelyn's tax returns. They even brought an Oklahoma banker to testify that such a cash purchase was extremely unusual. The financial paper trail was meticulous. Finally, they called Rafael Jimenez to testify live. Rafael took the stand, a man now in his late 40s who had been just a teenager back in 1983. Through an interpreter, he told the jury exactly what he had seen. The argument, the strange man at the car, the garage door opening, and Evelyn's hushed warning not to speak of it. His voice was quiet but steady. He was cross-examined by Evelyn's lawyer, who tried to shake his memory. But Rafael remained consistent. On redirect, he described Daniel's reaction in that argument, leaned forward angrily, shouted something unintelligible, and that the car was Daniel's own. He confirmed Evelyn's anxious look the next morning. His testimony underscored that Evelyn herself knew Daniel was gone and someone else was involved. With all evidence on the table, the government rested its case. The prosecution's closing argument was pointed. They told the jury, Evelyn Marquez was caught in lie after lie. She forged her husband's signature. She lied about his travel. We have Daniel's body buried a world away. This was not an accident. It was murder disguised as an adventure. The defense, led by a veteran public defender, argued otherwise. They said Evelyn had no proven motive to kill Daniel, and that receiving the insurance money was a tragic error, not a crime. They insisted Rafael's testimony was decades-late hearsay, and that a paper trail alone couldn't prove murder. But under cross-examination, the defense's own specialist agreed the telegram and certificate were not authentic. Evelyn herself testified on the stand showing a calm, sorrowful demeanor. She admitted forging the documents once more. She said it was so people would stop asking questions, but insisted she never physically hurt her husband. She said she just went along with the story because she was lonely and frightened. In rebuttal, the prosecution noted Evelyn's tearful plea for sympathy and early statements. "I just wanted to make sure my family was taken care of," but pointed out the pattern was too deliberate to be an error. They reminded the jury of the police signature forged on the death certificate, the international web of lies, and Raphael's unshaken account. After nearly 10 days of testimony, the judge gave final instructions. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The verdict came back, guilty on all counts. Evelyn Marquez was convicted of federal financial fraud, forgery, and concealment of a body. No one was convicted of the murder itself, since the crime happened in the Philippines, but the concealment charge was akin to aiding that murder by hiding the body. On May 25, 2017, Judge Keeling sentenced Evelyn Marquez. She received a total of 25 years in federal prison. The judge ordered restitution of the $243,000 plus interest. Evelyn gave no reaction in court except to lower her head. When asked if she had any last words, she remained silent. The courtroom left with a sense of finality. It had taken over 34 years, but justice, at least on the financial and cover-up charges, had been done. Aftermath and legacy. In August 2017, the U.S. Justice Department publicly released the final report on the Ward case. It was over 200 pages, compiled by the FBI field office. The report marveled at how forensic science and persistence solved what had been considered Oklahoma's longest cold case. The introduction noted 3 main reasons why the case had sat unsolved so long. Technological limits in 1983. Back then, there was no DNA or digital imaging. Without a body or witnesses, the investigation hit a dead end. Jurisdictional barriers. Daniel's remains were in the Philippines, and in the 1980s there was no easy way for Oklahoma police to search there. The NBI had limited means, and the mutual legal assistance protocols were not well established. Misclassification as missing presumed dead. Because Daniel was declared gone after a year, no one was looking for a murder victim. The case closed without exploring criminal angles. The report praised the Cold Case Review Initiative of 2015. It said that had not happened, Daniel's case likely would have never been reopened. Special Agent Rachel Doyle was credited for connecting the dots between documents, the typewriter, and that Cavite garden. It highlighted how modern DNA analysis was the key to this breakthrough. In Doyle's words, identification of the remains turned the tide. Once we knew who it was, we could see how they died. They also emphasized how international cooperation worked as a model. The joint FBI-NBI excavation was noted as a textbook example of proper cross-border evidence collection. The meticulous chain of custody ensured all the findings could be used in a U.S. trial. On a larger scale, this case spurred policy changes. The FBI urged that every missing person case involving financial claims be re-examined periodically. It also encouraged digitizing and cross-referencing cold case files, so clues like a typewriter model or a foreign address don't slip through cracks. In Weatherford, folks finally had closure. Daniel Ward's name was honored anew at the local Veterans Memorial. Evelyn's house, once the Ward home, became an empty lot after her conviction. The community learned that sometimes the loneliest run happens not on a lonely road, but behind the doors of a trusted neighbor. Lessons of the Ward case. Today, more than 4 decades after he disappeared, the Daniel Ward case stands as a powerful reminder. Justice, though delayed, is not denied. Through DNA science, international law, and dogged investigation, the truth came out in full. Daniel was a man who served his country, and in the end, his country, its laws and values, gave him back his name and brought the truth to light. In a broader sense, the case teaches us about integrity. In our administrative, legal, and financial lives, we rely on records and honesty. Here, one person's deceit nearly got away with stealing a life and defrauding a system. But hidden mistakes always leave traces. Evelyn Marquez's lies were uncovered bit by bit until the truth could no longer hide. For every person out there struggling to believe in the system when it seems broken, remember Daniel Ward. Technology and perseverance can overcome time. The AI algorithms and DNA tests we have now are tools, but it's committed investigators who follow the clues, and ordinary citizens can help too. Rafael Jimenez could have kept silent, but his voice, even decades later, cracked this case wide open. If you believe that justice can be served, even decades later, we invite you to share this story and subscribe to the Criminal Schema. We'll keep diving into cold cases, making sure no story of truth slips away in the shadows. We all have a stake in a just society. In the end, as the Ward case shows, every secret leaves a trail, and with diligence and courage, that trail can be followed home. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. If you have thoughts about this case or suggestions for future episodes, let us know down below. The truth is out there, and together with your support, we'll bring more hidden stories into the light. See you next time on the Criminal Schema, where every small clue can reveal a big truth.